We are now 10 days or so to the test. And one of the criticisms that I sometimes hear is you got all those inspirational messages, Mummy, that you post on YouTube and put in other places. But when are you going to talk about some concrete tip? A couple weeks ago, I did habit and consistency. That was pretty concrete. But I know that people want more than that sometimes. And there's plenty of that, obviously, within our course. But I thought that today, with 10 days to go, turn to what I think of as some of the master when it comes to writing. Two of my very favorites and great authors. And the truth is, you probably have this book somewhere in your library. This book is called The Elements of Style, a little thin book. It's a narrow book. Those two authors were Strunk and White. Don't you love that? Strunk and White. Now, I happen to have a very special edition of this book. It's an illustrated edition. And it is so great that somebody would come up with illustrations on grammar. In any event, this book you probably got somewhere in high school or college, and it's probably somewhere in your house or in your bookshelf. It is one of the classics in American education. Most of you probably heard of Strunk and White, probably somewhere, as I say, in middle school or high school, maybe even in college. In English classes, you most likely had to refer to this book, and it probably drove you crazy because it was so simple and so straightforward. It really has struck me as one of the few actual hard copy books that I keep on my shelf because I photo read, so actually everything's on my digital, but this is one that I keep in hard copy with its illustrations because I like the pictures a lot too. I mean, what other book would have an egg beater in it? Anyway, the great part about it is that I went back through to look at some of the basic guidelines to see if they would apply to writing good bar exam essays and performance tests, regardless of what jurisdiction that you're in. And I was stunned at how much application there was from the rules to what we teach and what we think good writing looks like. What I wanted to do for you today was to recite a few of those rules along with some notes that I've made about how I think it might apply to the kind of writing that you're doing. Professor Strunk and White, both deceased now, were classic masters of what we would describe as scarce and sparse language. They believed that the best writing was the most direct, and that informed a great deal of what they do. I also think it informs good bar writing. Here are their elementary principles of composition, most of which I think apply. The first of the elementary principles of composition was to choose a suitable design and hold to it. If you're in our course, that's important because we've already given you a particular writing structure. And you've heard me say repeatedly, stay within that structure, within the question or the answer itself, and from answer to answer. In other words, don't vary. Don't do one thing in some situations and then write differently in other situations. There are those bar applicants who jump around and write different kinds of answers, and they get themselves in trouble. They treat one question as something called a racehorse, and they do one thing. And then they treat another as a memorandum, and they do something different. And then they treat a third essay as an expository piece of writing, and they do something different again. And each time they get themselves into trouble. The trick here is to choose a suitable design for your writing and then hold on to it within the writing itself and from answer to answer. Be consistent. In our course, we've been very careful to say to you, every piece of writing holds the same form. Do the same thing. The second principle of composition, make the paragraph the unit of composition. I know people that write bar essays where the unit of composition is several pages long, or the unit of composition is a phrase, a legal term of art, or the unit of composition is whatever pops into their brain at that magic moment at the bar exam. Paragraphs are very high on my list of things that I'm a curmudgeon about. It's a nice little tool. Paragraphs tell us, stop, go to the next idea, tell the reader what's going on, put in a concept, deal with it, go to the next one, and go to the next one. If you don't write in paragraphs, whether it's a performance test or an essay, I think you're showing a considerable lack of writing skill for this form. You don't look or sound like a lawyer. You sound like a text messenger or an intelligent assistant that's just spilling information out. Now, I have to admit that you probably don't paragraph much when you're writing in Facebook or when you're using instant messaging or you're texting or you're sending emojis. I can hardly wait till we have the day when we can put emojis on bar answers. But here's the newsflash. The bar examiners, for the most part, don't do any of those things either. They don't know anything about that. In fact, they're probably the last people in the world to get on Facebook. And they certainly don't know what emojis are, and they certainly don't understand the concept of abbreviations and so forth. It just LOL to them. There's just no way to make that work. And if you're not using a paragraph as a form of composition, You're literally missing the way that this audience is communicating and wants you to communicate to them. The third principle of composition, probably my favorite, is very simple. It says use active voice. Come on, what else do I have to say? Don't write in the passive voice. Don't write in the third party, I'm a brilliant academic voice, but use active voice. Tell us specifically what you want. Make arguments to show how you would reason through a problem. Don't talk about the problem in the third party abstract. An observer of the legal problem might conclude that the possibility of the reverter might occur when the third party. What? What do you want? What's the argument? Sam failed to complete the transaction. Oh, okay, thanks. See, the passive voice is the opposite of active voice, but most people think they sound smarter when they use passive voice. This is particularly true for those of you that are foreign trained attorneys. You are dying to use passive voice because, frankly, most of the Romance languages, that's what you do. But Americans, yeah, we're New Yorkers, right? Forget about it. Just go to the next idea. Tell me what you need and move on. Next, very similar composition principle. Put statements in a positive form. Make arguments. Don't argue in the negative. I'm always surprised when people start an evidence essay, for example, by making the argument of the party who agrees with the ruling. Defendant will agree that this evidence should be admitted. Huh? That's a little hard to do, isn't it? Start with the party who's unhappy, the party who's going forward first, the plaintiff, the party objecting, the party making a motion, the party who's the petitioner, right? Not the respondent, the petitioner. Tell us the party who's got to go first. What's their argument? And then put that statement in a positive form. In the same vein, use definite, specific, and concrete language. Oh, I love that. If you're going to write something down, here's what you write down. Definite, specific, and concrete. You want another name for that? Okay. Facts. F-A-C-T-S. Facts. Definite, specific, and concrete. Who knew? Use the facts. That's exactly what we're talking about here. When people start talking about abstract theories of law and they don't ground it in the facts, they're neither definite, specific, or concrete. So if you begin the essay with the facts, which is what we tell you to do, then you are in the definite, specific, and concrete, and you can build from that in a way that is particularly powerful. The next is omit needless words. I know some of you would say, hey, Jackson, follow your own advice here. There's so much written throat clearing that goes on in a bar essay. Stop with all that. I read an essay today from a student in California who began their essay with, Proposition 8 requires all relevant evidence in California to be admissible. And I said, is there a dispute about that? No. Why did you write about it? Because someone in a bar review many years ago told me that we should always start with Proposition 8. Why? What's the point? It's needless. Oh, by the way, did you get through the whole essay? No, I ran out of time. Why? Because you were writing about stuff that didn't matter. Omit needless words, needless ideas, needless points. Just get to the point. Now, getting to the point doesn't mean that you write an issue statement and then the rule. It means frame the argument and then write about the argument. You don't need needless words. You don't need to say more. Those of you that have been in the writing style that we've been talking about know that we're talking about one or two sentences in the facts, 3 or 4 sentences in the law, and then 3 or 4 maybe for the application. So really concise. Next, Strunk and White say, avoid a succession of loose sentences. This is the unit of composition of the paragraph. It's the analog. I find way too many people who just put together sentences and they just put together these random sentences. Sometimes they issue spot that way. Sometimes they argument spot that way. Here's what they do. Here's a sentence. Oh, here's a sentence. Here's another sentence. Oh, look, here's another sentence. Do these sentences have any connection to one another? Apparently not. This idea of loose sentences is really difficult for the reader to understand. The reader has no idea what you're doing, and you want to avoid it. I said to a student today, this is the being John Malkovich problem. The reader can't get in your head. They don't know what you're doing with all these random loose sentences. So be explicit, be empathetic to the reader, and help the reader know exactly what you mean. When you just put together these loose, long sentences, and then you think to yourself, the reader will connect the dots. They'll figure out the connection because I'm in a hurry. It's a bar essay and I'm under pressure. Here's the problem. None of that will happen. And so you've got to help the reader. So get rid of the loose sentences. And the final elementary principle of composition that I want to highlight from Strunk and White is to express coordinate ideas in similar form. This is a lot like choosing the suitable design that we talked about earlier. And I think what the professors meant by this idea of coordinate ideas is that if you have an approach to the problem, stay with that approach all the way through your answer. Don't vary or deviate from it. In our writing, that means the 3-paragraph structure that we detail and teach. But whatever the writing style you're using, even if you're watching this later and you're using what I think of as the very deficient IRAC writing style because your big box bar review told you to do it or your law school told you to do it, at least stay consistent to that. It's the inconsistency that drives the readers crazy because now the reader has to stop and try to figure out what your meaning is because your structure no longer helps them understand it. If you've got coordinated ideas and you express them in the same form as we teach you to do in our course, then you are far ahead in the game. You're going to do much better. And we call that good, solid writing. I know there are some people out there in the world when this video gets out and we're going to say, for 5 weeks, I was a bar grader. I made $3.25 per essay. So I know you don't need to do any of those things. Oh, those people. I love it. Those folks can knock themselves out. But here's what I would say. Good writing is still good writing. And good writing has always had those qualities to it. And anyone who tells you that they can wade through all of the craziness, all of the mistakes that are made in writing in 5 or 6 minutes of reading an essay, and they don't need any of those tools or techniques to be successful, is really indicating their own lack of understanding and their lack of academic structure. This is a specific writing skill. And I think most of the people that would tell you you can ignore all that, just use IRAC and everything will be fine. What they're doing is sending you down the wrong path. The best way to write a successful essay or a performance test is to provide good writing. Now, there are a couple of other rules that Strunk and White have that I think are appropriate for bar exams, and I just want to highlight those. They come from the approach to style part of the book. If you happen to have the book somewhere in your office or bookshelf, it's a great section. It's just called The Approach to Style with a list of reminders. And there are 21 of them. I'm going to talk about 4. The authors say this. Number 14, avoid fancy words. Don't you love it? That's all they say, avoid fancy words. Pretty clear, isn't it? I'm always impressed when I see an answer that has lots of si infra, si supra, heretofore, thereafter, and all sorts of great language for those contract lawyers among you, because I know that really that's a contract lawyer in waiting who's going to dazzle the world with contracts in language that none of us will ever understand and rarely be excited about. Unfortunately, those contract lawyers in waiting may never make it past the bar exam to get that opportunity. When you avoid fancy words, all you're doing is being clear and communicating. You're being direct when you communicate. Instead of trying to find the fancy word, just get to the heart of the problem. Rule 16, be clear. Nothing else to say, be clear. Rule number 19, do not take shortcuts at the cost of clarity. Oh, this is a good one for bar examiners. Look, everybody knows you're under time conditions. And I know that means that you think everyone should understand that you're having a crisis, you're in a hurry. But those of you that think you're going to just put down some phrases at the end of your answer, some outline words, some terms of legal art, some buzzwords, let me tell you right now, it doesn't work. Shortcuts at the cost of clarity end up in confusion and obscurity. And the examiners, no matter what the jurisdiction is, simply can't respond in any meaningful way to that kind of writing. So you don't want to take a shortcut in your writing if it's going to hurt the clarity of the work you're doing. By the same token, don't abbreviate things. Don't abbreviate plaintiff as P or defendant as D or big bank as BB. Don't do it. Just spell it out, write it out. Do not take shortcuts at the cost of clarity. That simple. And then the final rule I want to capture for you is this. Prefer the standard to the offbeat. Some of you really enjoy your idiosyncrasies. You like the sense of being unique. You're like the person at American Idol that came out in the chicken suit. It was interesting for the 30 seconds that we watched it. Maybe the better analogy today would be on The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, the guy that comes out with the ventriloquist doll or right in on weird stuff, right? Whatever it does to get somebody's attention for 30 seconds. But the truth is, those guys never win the competition. In the same way, those of you that choose to write your essays and performance tests in some bizarre, idiosyncratic, highly individualized, very egocentric approach, we have a name for you in our industry. It's called a repeater. And that's the thing you obviously want to avoid. Don't try and call attention to yourself by doing some weird thing. Just use a standard approach. And I know some of you are saying, I should IRAC because everybody does that. No, plenty of people do what we teach too. The point I'm trying to make is don't do something weird. Don't suddenly start throwing a lot of exclamation points around and putting flowery marks on your page. And Don't use emojis. Okay. I think there are better standardized approaches than others, obviously, but no matter what approach you're using, be standard, be consistent, be clear. Now, when you do all of these things, when you take the lessons of a book like this one from Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, and you put them in your writing, you can't go wrong. I've been teaching writing for 3 decades now, and good writing will always succeed, no matter what the style or the material is. Good writing is good writing, whether you're writing to the US Supreme Court or you're writing to the bar examiners or you're writing a letter home. You never can go wrong with good writing. And I've never seen an essay come back from the bar examiners where the comment or the thought was, this was too clear. This was too straightforward. This was too understandable. You know that as well. So as you think about how to prepare in the upcoming days, keep that in mind. Study clearly, study in a straightforward way, be direct. And I think you'll find that the elements of style can be a very good friend to you as you get ready for your bar exam.